The phone was pressed so hard against my ear that I could feel my own pulse thumping in it, and my granddaughter's voice on the other end was thinner than a thread. "Grandma, don't go to the cabin with him, please. I heard him say you're gonna fall and it won't be nobody's fault." I was rinsing snap beans at the sink when she called, water running cold over my wrists, and I remember I laughed a little, the way you do when a child says something too big for their mouth. I was 64 that autumn, 4 years widowed, and I thought I understood the whole shape of my family the way you think you understand a house you've lived in 40 years, every creak, every draft. I was wrong about the house. I was wrong about all of it. "Sadie, sweetheart," I said, "slow down." "What cabin?" "Nobody's taking Grandma anywhere, the one in the mountains. He was on the phone in the garage. He didn't know I was in the car." Her breath hitched. "He said, the old lady, the railing, and it's done. He said your name after." The snap beans went still in my hands. I turned off the tap. Our kitchen, my kitchen, the one my late husband built the cabinets for with his own 2 hands back in 1986, went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming and the mantel clock in the front room and my own heart, which the doctor had already told me not to strain. My son-in-law sold insurance and did a little land development on the side, and everybody in our county thought he hung the moon. He had a handshake that made you feel chosen. My daughter had married him 6 years back, when Sadie was barely walking, and I had cried at that wedding out of pure relief, because my daughter had struggled after Sadie's father left, and here came this handsome, capable man who called me Miss Ada, and mowed my lawn without being asked, and remembered my late husband's birthday better than I did. "Baby, you must have heard something else," I said, and even as the words left me, I hated how thin they sounded. "Grown-ups say all kinds of things about work." He looked around after, Sadie whispered, like he was checking, and then he laughed, but not the funny laugh. I knew that laugh. I'd heard it once at Thanksgiving when my daughter dropped the good gravy boat, and he'd said accidents happen in a voice that didn't match his face. "Where are you right now?" I asked. "In my closet." "Mommy's at work. He's downstairs." A pause. "Grandma, I drawed it, all the ways. It's in my folder, the green one. I hided it in my backpack so he wouldn't find it." That should have been the moment I called somebody. The sheriff, my pastor, anybody. But you don't want to believe it. You've held a man's newborn stepdaughter at her christening. You've eaten his cornbread. Believing means the ground you've stood on your whole life is rotten, and the mind will do almost anything to keep from believing that. So instead I told her I loved her, told her to come to my house after school like always on Wednesday, and to bring her backpack. And I hung up and stood in my kitchen with cold water dripping off my elbows, and I told myself she was 7 and children make up stories. Wednesday she came in off the school bus, and she'd been crying so long her freckles had gone splotchy. She dropped her backpack on my braided rug and pulled out a green folder, the cheap plastic kind they buy by the dozen at the drugstore in August. And she laid the papers out on my coffee table one by one, careful as a card dealer, and I sat down hard on the couch because my legs stopped holding me. She'd drawn them in school, she told me. Their art teacher had them keep a feelings journal, and Sadie had been putting her feelings down in crayon and colored pencil. In one, there was a tall man. She'd made him tall, with the same slicked-back hair my son-in-law wore, standing at the edge of a brown cliff, and a small round woman in a blue dress tumbling off it, arms flung out, and above them in her wobbly 7-year-old letters, the cabin. In another, that same tall man stood at what she'd drawn as a kitchen counter, and there was a row of little colored dots. Pills, I realized. My pills, the ones I keep in the plastic organizer with the days of the week, and he had a hand over the box, and she'd written 8 puts more. In a third, there were 2 houses. One had her and her mama and grandma in the yard. The other, a whole different house, had the man again, and a woman with long yellow hair, and 2 children who weren't her, and she'd written other family, and drawn a little arrow between the houses like she couldn't make sense of how one man could belong to both. "When did you see him with my pills?" I asked, and I barely recognized my own voice. "When you took your nap at our house, on Sunday." She twisted the hem of her shirt, the exact thing my daughter did when she was frightened. "He opened your purse, he took your box, and he did something, and put it back." I was supposed to be watching cartoons. I have taken heart medication and a water pill every morning and evening since my late husband passed, and I carry a week's worth in that organizer, and I had been so tired lately, so dizzy. I'd stood up from the porch swing 3 times that month and had to grab the post because the yard tilted like the deck of a boat. My doctor had shrugged and said 64 wasn't 24 and maybe cut back on the salt. I'd believed him too. I believed everybody. That was the trouble with me. I'd been raised to believe men who spoke with confidence, and I'd done it my whole life, and it had nearly gotten me killed. Sadie, I said, and I made myself steady because she was watching my face for permission to be terrified. You did exactly right. You are the bravest, smartest girl I know. Now I need you to keep this between us, just you and Grandma, all right? Not even Mommy yet. Can you do that? She nodded so hard her braids swung. And there's one more thing, she said, and reached into her backpack again and pulled out the little plush unicorn she carried everywhere, the one with a button in its belly that let you record 10 seconds of a message. Her mama had bought it at the state fair. I made it hear him. She pressed the button, and out of that toy, tinny and small but unmistakable, came my son-in-law's voice, the one that had said Miss Ada to me for 6 years, saying, "No, the deck's already half gone. I don't have to do a thing." She leans on that railing and it lets go. 60 feet down into the gorge. Tragedy. Poor old thing, she should have never, and then it cut off where the 10 seconds ran out. I sat there in my own front room with my dead husband's clock ticking and my grandbaby's stuffed unicorn in my lap, and I understood that the handsome man who mowed my lawn wanted me dead, and had for some time, and had been feeding me something to make sure I'd be too dizzy to catch myself when the railing gave way. I did not cry. I want to tell you I fell apart, but I didn't, not then. Something went cold and clear in me instead, the way it does before a bad storm when the birds all go quiet. I made Sadie a peanut butter sandwich, cut off the crust the way she likes, and I sat with her while she ate it, and I thought, what I did not do was confront him. What I did not do was tell my daughter, because I did not yet know what she knew, and the thought of that my own child might know. I couldn't hold it. I set it down. What I did was call my nephew. My late husband's sister's boy, Grant, had gone into law enforcement out of high school and worked his way up to investigator with the county sheriff's office over in the next town. He was 40 now, gone gray at the temples, and he'd never trusted my son-in-law. Said so at the wedding quiet over the punch bowl. Aunt Ada, a man that's smooth as selling something. I'd told him to hush and enjoy the cake. He'd been right. He'd been right, and I'd told him to hush. I called him that night after I'd driven Sadie home and lied to my daughter's smiling husband on the porch about how much fun we'd had, my hand so steady it frightened me. I got in my car, drove 2 miles down the road, pulled into the parking lot of the Baptist church where nobody would think a thing of an old woman's car, and I called my nephew and told him everything, the drawings, the pills, the unicorn. There was a long silence on his end. Then, don't take another dose of that medication, not one. Do you have any at home, unopened, in the original bottle? Yes, take those. Bring me the organizer. Don't wash it, don't touch the inside. His voice had gone flat and professional, and it was, oddly, the most comforting thing I'd heard in weeks. And Aunt Ada, act normal. Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it. If he knows we know, we lose everything. We met the next morning at a diner 1 county over, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that tastes like it's been on the burner since Reagan. He took the pill organizer in a plastic bag. He listened to the unicorn twice, jaw working, and then he spread out on the sticky table what he'd already started pulling together in the 12 hours since I'd called, because Grant is not a man who sleeps when family is in danger. My son-in-law was not who he said he was. Or rather, he was exactly who he said he was to us, and someone else entirely to a woman named Camille in Charlotte, 90 minutes down the interstate. Grant had found her the way investigators find people, through property records and a business license and a Facebook page my son-in-law thought was private. There she was. Camille, with the long yellow hair from Sadie's drawing, and 2 little boys, and a modest brick house my son-in-law had bought 2 years ago under an LLC. He wasn't married to her, that would have been bigamy, and he was too careful for that. But he lived with her most weekends, the weekends he told my daughter he was at conferences or showing land. He's got a whole second life, Grant said quietly, sliding photographs across the table. And he's drowning. Look. Bank records, Grant had a warrant already coming, but he'd seen enough on the surface. My son-in-law owed money everywhere. He'd borrowed against the house he shared with my daughter, borrowed against the Charlotte house, run up debt on cards in 3 names. The land deals hadn't panned out. Camille didn't know about my daughter, and my daughter didn't know about Camille, and both of them thought the money troubles were temporary. So why me, I said. I'm just his wife's mother. I don't have, and then I stopped because I did have. I had my late husband's whole life. When he passed, he'd left me the house, free and clear, and the payout from selling his heating and cooling business he'd built from 1 truck to 11, and a certificate of deposit that had been quietly growing for 30 years, and it came to more money than a plain-spoken woman like me ever quite got used to talking about. And 2 years ago, my son-in-law, so helpful, so worried about me being alone, had sat at my kitchen table and walked me through getting my affairs in order, and I, fool that I was, had let him. Grant went very still. Aunt Ada, who's the beneficiary on your accounts? Who did he set up? I didn't know. I truly didn't. I'd signed what he put in front of me in that trusting way with his warm hand steadying the papers. That afternoon, Grant made some calls, and by evening he had it. My son-in-law had made himself the executor of my estate and the trustee of a trust that would receive everything I owned, to protect my daughter and grandchild. He'd said, and 18 months ago he'd taken out a life insurance policy on me, a policy I'd apparently signed for during what I'd been told was updating your homeowner's coverage, worth $700,000 payable to that same trust he controlled. A man drowning in debt, with a second family to feed, standing to collect nearly $1 million the day an old woman fell off a rotten cabin deck. And who would question it? A dizzy widow with a bad heart, out for a nice weekend in the mountains with the son-in-law everybody loved. When's the trip supposed to be? Grant asked. He hasn't asked me yet, I said, but he will. He did. 2 days later, at Sunday dinner at my daughter's house, pork roast, my daughter's mama's recipe, which is to say my recipe, he leaned back in his chair, patted his stomach, and said, "You know, Miss Ada, you've been looking peaked lately. I've got that little cabin up on the parkway sitting empty. Why don't I take you up for a couple nights? Mountain air, just the two of us. Give Delphine and Sadie a quiet house for once." He winked at my daughter. She smiled and said, "Wasn't that thoughtful?" And I looked at that man across the table, at the pork roast steaming between us, at my grandbaby drinking her milk, and I smiled right back and I said, "Why, that sounds like just the thing. My hip's been aching. I could use the rest." Guilt or satisfaction, I couldn't read which, crossed his face. He squeezed my hand. His wedding ring caught the light. Here is where a wiser woman might have let the police handle it clean and stayed home. Grant wanted that. He wanted to arrest him on the medication tampering alone. Once the lab came back, build the case slow, keep me 100 miles from that cabin. But the lab was slow, and a good defense lawyer could say I'd double-dosed myself, and the drawings of a 7-year-old and a toy recording of an out-of-context sentence. A jury might not hang a man on that. Grant knew it, and I knew it. The only thing that would put my son-in-law away for good, the only thing that would keep him from smiling his way out and doing it again, to me or to some other trusting soul, was catching him in the act. "I'm going," I told my nephew, in the church parking lot that had become our office. "He thinks I'm a slow old woman, drugged and half-blind. Let him think it. But he's going to do it in front of a camera, and he's going to say why." Grant argued for an hour. He's a good boy. But he's my late husband's blood, and stubborn runs in that family, and finally he rubbed his face and said, "Then we do it my way, every inch of it my way." For 4 days we planned. Grant brought in a detective from the sheriff's office named Reyes, a compact, unsmiling woman who took one look at Sadie's drawings and said, "We'll get him," like she was promising to fix a leaky faucet. They drove up to that cabin on the pretense of being a couple looking at property nearby, and they saw for themselves what my son-in-law had counted on. The back deck of that cabin cantilevered out over a gorge, 60-70 feet of open air down to a creek and rocks, and the railing along it had gone soft and gray with rot, one section already leaning. He hadn't even had to build the trap. The mountain had built it for him. He just had to walk me out onto it. They hid 2 cameras in the eaves, weatherproofed, angled at the deck. They wired the porch light, and they showed me a device thinner than a hearing aid that would ride behind my ear under my gray hair and catch every word he said. Reyes would be a 1/4 mile down the ridge with 2 deputies. Grant would be closer, in the tree line behind the cabin, close enough to run. When he says something that shows intent, Reyes told me, keep him talking. Every word he gives us is a nail. But the second you feel unsafe, the second you say the word sweet tea, you say it any way you like, work it in, but you say those 2 words and we come out of that tree line and it's over. Understand? Sweet tea, I repeated. The night before, I did the thing I hadn't let myself do in front of anyone. I sat on my back porch on the swing my late husband hung, and I let myself grieve. Not for me, I was going to be all right, I'd decided that. I grieved for my daughter, who was going to lose the man she loved and learn what he was in the same breath, and who was going to blame herself, and who I could not warn without risking everything. And I grieved for the 6 years I'd sat across the table from a murderer and passed him the biscuits and thanked God for sending my daughter a good man. Sadie called me at bedtime, whispering again from her closet, "Are you going to be okay, Grandma?" "I am," I told her, "because of you. You hear me? Because a brave girl told the truth even when it was scary, your grandma's going to be just fine. You just keep drawing your feelings, baby. You keep them safe. I love you to the moon and the whole way back, to the moon and the whole way back and around again." I said, "Our thing," and I hung up before she could hear my voice go. He picked me up Friday morning in his big clean truck, and he was charming the whole 2 hours up the parkway. Told stories, held the door, pointed out the leaves just starting to turn, the reds coming into the maples, and said, "Didn't the good Lord make a beautiful world?" I sat in the passenger seat with a paper cup of coffee I never drank because I couldn't be sure of it, and I played the part I'd practiced. Tired, grateful, a little foggy. I let my head loll against the window. I let him think the pills were still doing their work, even though I hadn't taken a bad one in a week. "You seem more clear-headed today," he said once, glancing over, and there was something behind it, a testing. "Oh, the mountains always did perk me up," I said, and yawned. "Your father-in-law used to say the same, God rest him. That shut him up a while." Good. The cabin was just as they'd described, pretty as a postcard from the front, all cedar and river rock, and out back that deck reaching over nothing. He carried my bag in, made a fire, fussed over me. Made me tea I poured into a potted fern when he stepped out. We ate a supper he'd brought, and I ate only what he ate, watching, and I slept that night, or pretended to, in a room with a lock I quietly turned. Saturday morning he was up before me. When I came out, he'd made coffee, and he'd opened all the doors to let the mountain in, and the light off that gorge was so gold and clean it seemed impossible that anything bad could happen in it. That's the thing about beauty. It doesn't take sides. "Come see the view before the fog burns off," he said. "You've got to stand at the rail. You can see 3 ridges." My heart went off like a jackrabbit, but I made my face slow and pleased. I picked up my cardigan. Under my hair, behind my ear, the little wire sat warm. Somewhere in the trees my nephew was watching. I had to trust that. When you get to be my age, you learn that trust is a thing you do on purpose, not a thing that happens to you, and I chose it with every step I took across that living room toward the open door. The deck was worse up close. The boards gave a little underfoot, spongy. He walked ahead of me, easy, and leaned his hands on the good section of railing, and I stopped short of the bad section, the leaning gray one, and let him see me hesitate. "It doesn't look real sturdy," I said. "Ah, it's fine. Come here, Miss Ada, right here." He patted the rotten rail. "Best view in the state right off this spot. Your husband would have loved it. Keep him talking. Let the wire catch it all." "You've been so good to me," I said, and stayed put, ever since he passed. "I don't know what I'd have done without you handling everything, the papers and all." I never did understand any of it. Something eased in him, hearing that. Vanity is a door, and I'd found the handle. "That's what family's for," he said. "You didn't need to worry your head. I set it all up so you're taken care of." So they're taken care of if anything ever happened to you, if anything happened to me. I let it sit. "Like what?" "Well," he smiled, and it was the Thanksgiving smile, the one that didn't reach. "You never know. Woman your age. Bad heart. Dizzy spells." He tilted his head, watching me with those testing eyes. "You have been getting awful dizzy lately, haven't you, Miss Ada?" "I have," I said. "The strangest thing. My doctor can't figure it. Almost like something in my medicine changed." The smile went thin. He straightened off the rail. "Come stand by me," he said, and it wasn't charming anymore. It had gone quiet and level, the voice from the unicorn. "Come look at the view. I think I'll stay right here," I said. "This board's rotten. A person could fall. A person could." He took a step toward me, and the deck groaned under him. "You know, don't you?" It wasn't a question. His whole face rearranged itself, and it was like watching a mask slide off. Underneath was somebody I'd never met, somebody flat and hungry. "You've known this whole time. That's why you didn't drink the coffee. That's why you're not dizzy." A short laugh. "Your nephew. That deputy. Delphine's fool cop cousin. He got in your head." "My granddaughter got in my head," I said. "Sadie. 7 years old. She heard you in the garage. She drew what you are." My voice didn't shake, and I have thanked God many times since that it didn't. "You want to know the difference between you and a little girl, son?" She told the truth even though it terrified her. "You've been lying so long I don't think you'd know the truth if it pushed you off a deck." For 1 second I saw it, the calculation, the weighing. He was between me and the door. The gorge was behind me. And he was younger and stronger, and no matter how many deputies were in those trees, they were a quarter mile off, and a strong man only needs 3 seconds, he lunged. I'd like to tell you I did something clever. I didn't. I dropped. My late husband taught me that, of all things, 30 years ago, an intruder scare, he'd said if a bigger person comes at you, get low, get small, make them reach. I dropped to that spongy deck and grabbed the base of the good rail post with both arthritic hands, and my son-in-law's grab closed on air and then on my cardigan, and he hauled, and the fabric tore, and he stumbled forward off balance, and his hip hit the rotten rail, the very rail he'd meant for me, and it let go with a crack like a rifle. He went halfway over. I heard him scream, a real scream, nothing charming in it, and I heard myself scream, "Sweet tea," and I heard, from the tree line and the ridge, the beautiful, terrible sound of people crashing toward us through the underbrush. He didn't go all the way over. He caught the broken rail and hung there, legs kicking over the gorge, screaming for help, screaming my name, "Ada, Ada, help me." I didn't mean it, help me, and God forgive me. For 1 long second, I stayed on my knees clutching that post and I did not move. The wire behind my ear caught all of it. His weight, his terror, and my stillness. Then my nephew was there, and Detective Reyes, and 2 deputies, and they hauled him up over the broken rail and onto the boards, and they had him in cuffs before he'd finished catching his breath, and he lay there face down on the deck of the cabin where he'd meant to make me a tragedy, and Reyes read him his rights in that flat faucet-fixing voice, and it was the finest thing I ever heard. Grant got me aside, got a blanket around me, kept saying, "I've got you, Aunt Ada, I've got you," and I realized I was shaking so hard the coffee he handed me sloshed over the rim. He knelt in front of me. "You did it. It's on tape, all of it. His hands on you, his mouth on all of it. He is done." "He hung there," I said. My teeth were chattering. "He hung there and he called me by my name." "You didn't push him," Grant said gently. "That railing was his, not yours." "No," I said. "I didn't push him, and I hadn't. But I'll tell you the truth, since I'm telling all of it, for 1 second, on my knees, I understood how a person could. I just chose not to be that. I'd chosen trust the whole way up that mountain, and I chose it one more time, right there. Trust that the law was enough, that I didn't have to become what he was. It's the choosing I'm proudest of, more than surviving. The rest went the way these things go, slow and grinding. They charged him with attempted murder, and then the lab came back and they added the poisoning. He'd been swapping my heart medication for a diuretic and slipping something more into the organizer, enough to keep me lightheaded, enough that a fall would surprise no one. They added insurance fraud, forgery, a whole alphabet of financial crimes once the warrants opened his accounts. Camille, when the detectives found her in Charlotte, sat down on her own front steps and cried. She truly hadn't known about my daughter, hadn't known about the scheme, had believed the debts were bad luck and the weekends away were work. She was a victim too, in her own way, and her 2 little boys most of all. I've made my peace with her. It wasn't her fault a charming man can wear more than one face. The hardest part wasn't the trial, it was my daughter. I had to tell her. Grant offered, Reyes offered, but she was my child, and it had to be my voice. I sat her down at my kitchen table, the one her daddy built, and I laid it out plain, and I held her while she came apart. She screamed at me first, "You're wrong, he loves us, this is a mistake, you never liked him," and I let her, because grief has to go somewhere, and I'd rather it went at me than at Sadie. Then I played her the tape. His voice, his own mouth, and she stopped screaming and just folded over the table and made a sound I hope to never hear again from anyone I love. She blamed herself for a long while, thought she should have seen it. I told her what I've come to know as bone-deep true. A good liar doesn't get caught by good people paying attention. A good liar gets caught by a 7-year-old who hasn't learned yet to explain away what she sees. My daughter had loved him honestly, and there is no shame in loving someone honestly. The shame is all his. He got 22 years. His lawyer tried to say I'd lured him up there, entrapped him, that a bitter old woman had staged the whole thing to steal her daughter's marriage. But the drawings were dated by the school weeks before I knew anything. The medication in my blood proved the poisoning. The recording caught him with his own confession, his own hands, and no jury on this earth was going to believe that I, 64 with a bad hip and a bad heart, had climbed a mountain to throw myself off a deck and frame the man I'd fed pork roast for 6 years. The foreman read guilty 11 times, once for each count, and I watched my son-in-law's face go flat and empty, the mask gone for good, and then they took him away. My daughter divorced him from a distance while he sat in prison. She and Sadie moved in with me for a couple of years, into the house her daddy built, and slowly the three of us learned how to breathe again. There was a season it was all doctors and lawyers, and Sadie waking screaming, and my daughter not eating, and me lying awake counting the ticks of that mantel clock. But grief is like the mountains in fall. It turns if you let it. The reds come in, then the bare branches, then eventually the green. I am 68 now. I still live in this house. My daughter remarried 2 years ago, a quiet man, a widower who fixes small engines and has never once told me a story about himself that I later found untrue, which I've decided is the highest praise I can give a person. Sadie is 11 and tall as a reed and still draws, only now she draws horses and dragons in the ocean she's never seen, and last spring her art hung in the county fair with a blue ribbon on it. Sometimes she catches me looking at her and she says, "What, Grandma?" and I just shake my head, because how do you tell a child that her crayon saved your life? I tried once. She got embarrassed and told me to stop being weird. So now I just tell her I love her to the moon and the whole way back and around again, and she rolls her eyes, and it is the most precious thing I own. I keep that stuffed unicorn on the shelf in my bedroom. The batteries died years ago and I never replaced them. I don't need to hear it again. I know what it says. I want to say one thing to whoever's listening to an old woman talk, and then I'll let you go. If a child tells you something is wrong, about a grown-up, about a house, about a feeling in their stomach they can't name, you stop what you're doing and you listen with your whole self. Children haven't learned yet to explain danger away. They haven't learned to say surely not, or he'd never, or I'm sure I misheard. They just tell you what they saw. My granddaughter saw a man count my pills and stand at a rotten rail and belong to 2 families at once, and she was too young to talk herself out of any of it, and that is exactly why she was right when every adult around her, myself included, was fixing to be dead wrong. I almost didn't listen. I stood at my sink with cold water on my wrists, and I nearly told that baby she was making things up. I've thought about that 100 times since. How close I came to patting her head and saying, "Silly girl," and packing my bag for the mountains anyway. I would have gone up that parkway. I would have stood at that rail. And some quiet Sunday, my daughter would have gotten a phone call about a terrible accident, and she'd have raised Sadie to believe her grandma slipped, and she'd have kept feeding pork roast to the man who did it. Trust the feeling in your own stomach. Trust the child who's brave enough to whisper. And if something in your life is wearing a face too smooth to be true, look closer, because I promise you, somebody already sees it clear. You just have to be humble enough to believe them. I get my coffee on this porch every morning now, in the swing my husband hung, watching the light come up gold over the ridge. Nobody makes my coffee but me. Nobody counts my pills but me. And every single ordinary morning, boring and quiet and safe, I say a small thank you for the mountain that turned his trap back on him, for the law that was enough, and most of all for a 7-year-old with a green folder and a box of crayons who told the truth when the truth was terrifying and saved her grandmother's life.